Good morning. I'm Catherine Marshall, Senior Fellow at the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs at Georgetown University, and I'm speaking from Washington, D.C. Welcome to all of you to this webinar focused on refugees and the broader problem of forced migration. At this time of the year, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, our thoughts turn very often to the plight of people who are forced from their homes, whether they're refugees or whether they are internal migrants, people within their own countries. And we are reminded of our history and our traditions, which in so many cases involve forced moves, suffering. In this time of short days, of long nights, of increasing cold, our hearts and our minds turn very often to these issues of the people who do not have the shelter, do not have the comfort of their homes and the uncertainty that they face. This event, this webinar, is part of a project of the Berkeley Center that is called the Culture of Encounter. It is inspired above all by Pope Francis and his very frequent reference to a culture of encounter as one of the ways and approaches to trying to deal with the complexity of the world's issues and, above all, with the tensions that arise among religious traditions, between religious and non-religious actors, and among people of so many kinds. This culture of encounter, which he exemplifies himself in his outreach, in his willingness to listen, to empathize, but also in his call to a much broader shift in relationships beyond formal interreligious or interfaith, intrafaith dialogue towards a much broader appreciation of what we mean by encounter and its benefits as well as its challenges. In 2023-24, the Berkeley Center is focusing particularly on two issues, looking at the religious dimensions and the broader dimensions of the roles of children, child protection, child rights, child voice, and of forced migration, the issues of refugees, and the broader issues that are posed by migration and the ways that it affects societies. So today, this is a framing discussion where we are really setting out what will be a year-long journey, a journey of exploring particularly the religious dimensions of these challenges of forced migration and how they relate to the ways in which we interact. We have five remarkable panelists who bring very different perspectives, very different aspects of this encounter. We will run this as a conversation, encourage you to pose questions in the Q&A part of the screen. This is being recorded, and the recording will be sent to everyone as well as posted on our website. And I very much highlight that this is a continuing conversation where this event today will, I hope, set the parameters, but also pose some of the challenges and questions. So I'm asking each of the panelists, starting with Beth Ferris, who is a colleague at Georgetown in the Migration Center, who has, I think, a remarkable overall appreciation of the 30 million refugees, 60 plus million internally displaced people, but also of the compacts, the recent refugee forum, which has taken place this week. But above all, I think she's thought deeply about the basic question of what's religion got to do with it? Why does it matter? So I'm asking each of the panelists, starting with Beth, to sort of say how they came to this issue, but how they see the issue, how they frame the issue, and what are the main things that are on their minds as we enter into this process. So over to you, Beth.
Yeah, well, thank you, Catherine. And it's great to be with you this morning and talk about an issue very dear to my heart. You know, I'm an academic researcher and do a lot of research on different topics, but I worked for over 20 years with faith-based organizations, primarily the World Council of Churches and Church World Service here in the U.S., working to support churches and increasingly interfaith groups in their ministry to uprooted people, whether refugees or internally displaced. You know, and this kind of ministry, this kind of response takes many different forms in different contexts. But it's almost universal that when people are forced to leave their homes or flee their countries, that they turn to places of worship, faith communities for assistance. They show up on church doors and on the steps in the front of mosques to ask for assistance with the most basic of needs. And oftentimes these organizations, these communities, whether a local church or synagogue or mosque or temple or a specialized ministry of these organizations, provides continuing service to uprooted people, both refugees and people who do not meet the legal definition of refugees, but often have needs equally as serious as those who do. And what I've seen over and over again, that as faith communities engage with uprooted people, sooner or later they come to the question of, well, it's really great to be able to provide this welcome, this relief, but you know, somebody's got to address the root causes to stop the violence or the disasters that are provoking such havoc among people. And they turn to advocacy. The advocacy is often really difficult for faith communities because advocacy in addressing root causes is always political. It's always involving people who make decisions that affect the well-being of those who are uprooted. It's also difficult because many faith communities operate within a humanitarian tradition, which is to help people on both sides of a conflict without regard to their politics or race or religion, to be neutral, independent. But you know, when you get involved in addressing the causes, whether it's the suffering going on in Ukraine right now, or what's happening in Gaza or in Myanmar, you know, it really challenges those principles. Can you be neutral as a humanitarian worker, as a member of a faith community working with refugees and displaced people in places where it's very clear who the aggressor is, and a tendency to want to side with those who are suffering the effects of that. So there are problems sometimes in engagement. But you know, faith-based organizations have unique characteristics that place them very well to do advocacy, whether at the global level or at the local level or the national level. You know, first of all, they have constituencies. I work with a lot of wonderful human rights groups like Human Rights Watch, which does incredible work all over the world. But you know, faith-based groups represent someone. They have a constituency. They have people behind them. When I was at Church World Service doing research or advocacy on U.S. immigration policy, just to see the phenomenal impact that a meeting of 12 pastors in Chicago had with their representative, which was a very different kind of pressure, of support, of a resource that even wonderful organizations like Human Rights Watch couldn't mobilize. So, you know, understanding that having that constituency, those members behind you is a powerful source of pressure on questions of addressing root causes. Similarly, the fact that people in faith communities are largely motivated by their faith. This isn't, you know, a professional calling, something to put on your resume, but something that people feel deeply about. And I think that being rooted in a faith tradition, you know, coupled with the constituency, and oftentimes rooted in personal experiences, It's very meaningful for members of Congress or some of these big UN organizations to hear from faith communities about individuals they've met or what they've seen with their own eyes. And I can't emphasize enough how important that is, and not only developing effective advocate, but also in transforming individuals and frankly, transforming faith communities when that opportunity emerges. So there are lots of examples, and maybe in later discussion, I can go into some of them. But it was faith communities that brought the issue of internally displaced people, who now number more than twice as many as the world's refugees, onto the international agenda. And that came about because organizations started hearing from local churches and mosques, hey, we've got all these internal refugees. What can you do about them? And we're able to put this onto the international agenda. And last week, as Catherine mentioned, the Global Refugee Forum was held in Geneva, once in 4-year event. There were over 6,000 participants. All kinds of organizations, private sector, governments asked to make pledges to make things better for refugees and displaced people. And, I was very proud to see the interfaith response to that Global Refugee Forum to be present and to make it clear that this is an issue of concern to people of faith around the world. So, the link between direct action and advocacy is almost a normal sort of progression, and can have an enormous impact. Thanks.
Thank you, Beth. That, I think, brings out two vital elements of what we're talking about. The first one, clearly the direct involvement, people arriving at your doorstep and really needing to deal with it. And then secondly, the much broader effort of trying to communicate that to what we call the international community, the broad community. Let's turn now to Cynthia Lange, who's also in Washington, who I think is very focused on the Western Hemisphere, which I think people sometimes forget is a huge part of this forced migration challenge. It certainly is part of the political landscape, but I think it also is very much part of the global scene. So, Cynthia, maybe you can say how you come to this issue, from what perspectives, how the religious element comes into it, and maybe a broad framing of how you see the questions.
Thanks so much, Catherine. I'm honored to be part of this distinguished panel and discuss this topic. My background, I've practiced immigration law for more than 38 years, starting at the US government and then in private practice in the United States. I also taught immigration law for 18 years in law school and have worked as a board member with the National Immigration Law Center, working to advocate and litigate for the rights of low-income immigrants. I currently represent 2 civil societies at the Organization of American States, but my bio is on the Berkeley Center website. What really brought me to this was personal experience and my faith. As a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we believe the second greatest commandment is to love our neighbors. But it's more than a commandment, it's a passion. We believe it's a true source of joy in our lives. And we serve all of God's children and have a strong focus on refugees. And personally, I'm a child of immigrants. My father came from a rough railroad town in the jungles of southern Mexico with limited options had he remained. He came to the US to study. I remember him telling us he put, all the items of clothing he had in a cardboard suitcase. He went to a place he didn't know the culture, the climate, the landscape. They were foreign to him. But he was forever grateful for the good people that stepped in and helped him integrate into the community. And that is seared in my mind as what a possible experience could be. And not only did they help him, but my father helped the country to be a better place. And that's also what's important to remember in the refugee crisis, is it's not just us helping them, but there's so much that they can contribute. Today, certainly in this hemisphere, as you said, Catherine, there's many people fleeing danger and persecution. The sort of drivers are dramatic. Why people are leaving, the horrible conditions that they may be subject to, the corruption in their home countries, the brutality in some cases, and they're seeking refuge because they have to not because they want to. Many of these people would rather stay at home. Some are highly educated, some are skilled workers, other are unskilled, but they do bring, drive and capital and help that they can contribute. I'm passionate about these issues of migration, but particularly from refugees, and women and children are in especially vulnerable circumstances. The number of women fleeing high levels of violence, crime, natural disasters, food insecurity, poverty, and crossing borders has reached record highs. Often, years in the past, the U.S. migration were men coming across to take jobs and then going back home. This is a completely different type of migration, and it includes just numbers of women and children that are unaccompanied crossing borders. And the journey is arduous. It involves danger of extortion. There's so much corruption and criminal enterprises involved now in the transportation and extortion of people along the routes. Most of them have only the clothes on their back. So to your question about how we come at this, one of the things I think we've seen is that the policies have tended to focus around stopping the flow at one point, and they don't fully understand or address or take into account root causes of migration. Faith-based organizations have been amazing at reacting to needs of people. And, I've done interviews after interviews of many organizations who say faith-based organizations are really the network holding these things together, keeping food in people's mouths and reacting. But I look forward to a better organization and coordination, maybe to address some of the root causes. I think there's issues with doing that. I think we'll talk about that are difficult, but I still think there's many possibilities, and also bringing faith-based organizations together to be able to coordinate better, to address some of these. Reacting is very important, and the coordination of reaction will be important, but also being able to look at some of the complexities together and being able to come together to address some of these complexities will be really important. I'll leave it at that, and I look forward to the discussion, Catherine.
Thank you, Cynthia. That's fantastic. And I think you bring both the personal dimension, that is something that I suspect links all of us who are involved in looking so much for better solutions. Some of the important aspects that come with these religiously linked organizations, the legal, mentioning the criminal aspect, and mentioning, I think, highlighting the need to go to the roots of what the problem is. Let's turn now to Mansoor Hassan, who's sitting in, I think he's sitting in Dhaka in Bangladesh. Mansoor has quite an intensive involvement with, I think, one of the many heartbreaking challenges in this area, the Rohingya community that is now in Bangladesh. When they arrived many of them have been there much longer, but the large numbers arrived in 2017. It seemed impossible that in 2023 they would still be there. Mansoor, I think, is very much involved in trying to think through different solutions. So Mansoor, you're at the BRAC University Center for Peace and Justice, a partner with us. Maybe you can situate a bit how you see that really dramatic situation of the Rohingya population.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you for inviting me to this discussion. I'm really delighted to be here. Like Cynthia, I started my legal profession in the UK for nearly 4 decades ago, and the work that I started with was the refugee work. I was a refugee lawyer in the UK, and I remember dealing with people from different countries, different communities, coming to the UK and seeking asylum and refugee status. But that was 4 decades ago. But since then, I've come over to Bangladesh, and I've been involved with governance issues for a number of years. But for the last 10 years, I've been involved with the Center for Peace and Justice. And we started work in 2014 and basically started focusing on SDG 16, particularly looking at the issues of legal empowerment. But then in 2017, as you mentioned, Catherine, the Rohingya refugees came into Bangladesh. And by sheer coincidence, I was in Cox's Bazar on that particular day when they started coming in August 2017. And I saw the first responders, basically the local people who came forward and really gave shelter to these wretched people who left the country in really difficult situation. They were beaten, they were burned, they were raped, and to leave everything behind and come over. And thankfully, the Bangladesh government opens its border and allowed nearly over 1 million people to come in, a population greater than the size of Bhutan, our neighboring country. And that was really a kind of a horrific kind of a situation that we found ourselves in. But I think the interesting and most striking thing was the way the local people opened up their doors and gave shelter to these people, and also local NGOs who came in, and the national NGOs who came in and catered for their needs. I think that the important thing is that it was the same kind of religious background people who were coming into Bangladesh from Myanmar. And you can say that there was, obviously the reason was, one of the main reasons was persecution by the Buddhist majority, who really basically drove the Muslim community, Rohingya community into Bangladesh. But the point that I would like to make is that, despite the fact that there were Muslim population who were coming into Bangladesh, and the initial generosity gave way to some sort of conflict, not physical conflict, but kind of misunderstanding, which was very interesting, and the way the NGOs and other international organizations dealt with it is something that I would like to touch upon later on. But the fact is that what was important was that the religious actors, religious leaders, both within the Rohingya community and the host community, became very important elements in terms of creating social cohesion between the two communities and to reduce the conflict and the misunderstanding. I think this is something which was recognized by the NGOs, by the government, by the international agencies, that if we have to really address this issue of misunderstanding and frustration among local host community, we have to work with religious leaders, the religious actors. It's important that we bring them into the process of kind of developing new ideas. And I think this is something that happened subsequently, and the religious leaders actually played a very important role, and they were trained not by just their own religious kind of institutions, but also by the international organizations and NGOs, in order to understand what are the main issues that's really affecting both the communities. So I would say that, even if there is a kind of homogeneous nature of the community in terms of religion, there can be division that can actually affect both the communities in a negative sort of way. And then how the religious leaders, religious actors step in and actually address some of those issues is very important to look into. And I think there are a number of useful lessons that we can learn from this. But I think what is also important is that the research that needs to be done. I think there's a kind of, I feel there's a neglect when it comes to religious actors' role in the humanitarian crisis. This is something that really needs to be looked at, and we need to find out more about the kind of the role that they can play. But I think for the time being, I think we can say that both in terms of gender issues, both in terms of community cohesion. I think religious actors have a very important role to play, and this is something that I would like to develop upon as we move forward with the conversation.
Thank you, Mansoor. That's very helpful, both in situating the evolution of the problem of welcome, but also this important issue for all of us, which is where is the knowledge, and is the knowledge used, and where are the gaps in knowledge? We'll turn now to Cyril Horan, who's in Kyiv, who's dealing with another heartbreaking situation that we're facing in late 2023, the Ukrainian crisis war, and the enormous numbers of displaced people that are suffering because of that war. Cyril.
Hello, thank you. Yes, indeed, greetings from Kyiv, from Ukraine. It's quite snowy here, quite dark. And occasionally we hear the explosions from the anti-missile systems over Kyiv. Catherine mentioned that the panelists came to the issue of refugees and displaced people. In my case, I think the issue came to me, and I was taken by this issue without proper preparation, with illiteracy. It happened that on the 23rd of February 2022, just on the eve of the great invasion, full invasion of Russia to Ukraine, I left Ukraine for a 2 days business to Europe. I left with my small bag, and I didn't come back to Ukraine until 1.5 years later. So I found myself in a situation that I realized later that, well, look, I'm a refugee, technically speaking, even though I was like more privileged than many other Ukrainians who didn't have where to go. I had places where to stay, where to go, but I was kind of absorbed by this huge wave of of refugees, millions of Ukrainians who fled to the West, and I found myself involved immediately in helping those people, helping also from the religious perspective. I am a priest, an Orthodox priest, and many people reached out to offer them spiritual help in addition to the material needs that they had. And I had a very broad experience of helping, being in contact, in touch with the refugees, from confessing Ukrainian refugees in Los Angeles, in a small community, Greek community, to celebrating in the Royal Chapel in Stockholm in the presence of the royal family for the Ukrainian refugees. And I faced and tried to help a very wide array of issues that the refugees faced, speaking spiritually, speaking ecclesially. They wanted to have to go to the church. They wanted to join communities, and those communities were not immediately available to them. Still, they are not available to many of them. We are facing, or they are facing, the refugees are facing the issue abroad, while abroad, the issue of not being able to go to the place where they would have counsel, they would have advice and spiritual guidance, and they just leave the church, or they just stop going to the church because they don't know where to go. Also, they have to deal with all sorts of traumas. We are talking, I believe, about a sort of pandemic of trauma, of PTSD, and other consequences of the war that the Ukrainian people face, both in Ukraine and outside. And they also have need in some sort of pastoral care or pastoral psychological help. That's another issue that they face, and where the church is supposed to help, and it is not always up to the need of the refugees. I mentioned that I came back to Ukraine instead of, as it was planned, to come back after 2 days. I came back 1.5 years later in the spring 2023. And immediately I faced a different sort of challenges in Ukraine. Yes, regarding the internally displaced people, there are more IDPs in Ukraine than the refugees, and all our cities which are relatively safe are now flooded really with the people from the east and from the south. But what I discovered that it is much more a challenge, not for the IDPs or the refugees, but for those who decided to stay, especially to stay in the places which are being under attacks. And I embarked on some missions that I'd like to use my remaining 2 or 3 minutes to show you what kind of missions we had, and they are ecumenical missions where we join together the efforts of the evangelicals, Pentecostals, Catholics, and Orthodox to help people who decided to stay, quite the opposite to the refugees. So let me just briefly share with you my screen. So this is, I hope you can see it. So this is the mission that was endorsed by Pope Francis. You know how close he is to Ukraine. And this is a group of evangelical and Pentecostal pastors and lay people who decided to help those people who are in need and who are in the front lines. So with this group, I joined this group later on, and we went to the Ukrainian front lines. And the purpose of our coming there was to help exactly those sort of people. So this is a humanitarian, the humanitarian aid that we distributed. After we went to these areas, like Orikhiv, it's in the southern front line of Ukraine. This used to be a humanitarian hub built by the churches. And this hub was destroyed by 2 Russian air bombs in July 2023, with some remaining inhabitants of Orikhiv who decided to stay being killed there. They are mostly elderly people. They would come here just to, to take shower and to have some hot food. And many of them, over 10 of them, were killed. Those who remained, those who leave, who were not killed, they stay in the conditions of being constantly under missile attacks. They stay like this at the basement of their house. You can see that they are elderly people with the age from like 70, 65 through 80 or above 80. They don't have electricity, they don't have running water. So we brought them water, we brought them really basic goods. We were well protected with our helmets and bulletproof jackets. They were not, and they are exactly the opposite to the refugees. They are those who stay, and you see that they stay in much worse conditions, and they need more help than the refugees. They leave. This is like an entrance to their shelter, which was bombarded just a couple of days before we arrived. And that's the conditions they live in. That is their kitchen and storage. This is their refectory and sitting room. This is their bedroom where they live together, stay together. And that is the conditions that we saw on the front line. We keep help. Yes, and we went there with the blessing of Pope Francis. He was very much aware about this mission, and he was reported about this mission. And this is really an indication how such humanitarian missions can be also ecumenical, how they can bring the people of different traditions together to help those who need this help. So that's my kind of a short introduction. Well, I hope it was short, and I'm happy to discuss it further.
Well, thank you. And I think you've raised some of the issues of the real needs, the fundamental spiritual needs of the people who forced to leave, but also those who stay behind. We turn now to Ruth Messenger. Ruth comes at these issues from many different perspectives. So maybe you can give us some sense of of what those perspectives are and some of the challenges that you see from looking at the culture of encounter, at the very specific challenges for refugees and forced migrants in the United States, but also obviously in other parts of the world, including the Middle East.
I'm happy to do that. I'm sorry to have been a little late to the panel, but having heard Cyril and Cynthia and Manzoor, it's clear to me that in a sense we all have our hands on the duality of this issue, and that is that in some instances refugees are created by hostility on disagreements over land, but sometimes also between faith groups. And on the one hand, and then on the other hand, every religious tradition represented on this screen, and I think really every religious tradition, has an orientation toward welcoming the stranger and trying to provide services. And so there's that tension, and how do we emphasize the second over the first? But I'll tell you how I come to this is like, as you said, many faceted. When I worked and ran American Jewish World Service, which is an international human rights organization, for 20 years, I became aware of the vast number of refugees and immigrants around the world. Because when you live in America, or at least if you live in America and you don't think widely enough, you know your own immigrant story. And you think of America as the place that people want to come to, and America as the place that has refugees. And then when you start working worldwide, you understand that there are refugees from every war, and many now from climate disasters. Many of the world's refugees today are climate refugees who are fleeing where they lived, not because a person or a dictator or a war is chasing them out, but because the change in the agricultural cycle, with either too much rain or not enough rain, is driving them away from the only life they've ever known, and they become refugees because they can't afford to stay where they are and survive. So that's one connection. And then I am a second-generation American. I am currently of the opinion that everybody in America needs to start all of their conversations by announcing which generation they are, so that they understand, basically, as Cynthia emphasized this very nicely, how recently their families came to this country, and how, to be honest with you, how absurd it is that they are talking about immigrants as like the worst plague they ever imagined and destroying their way of life, when in fact their parents or grandparents came to this country, sometimes were reviled, sometimes were welcomed, but in either case became the underpinning of the country, and grew up with their own resilience. And I think many more Americans need to understand their own immigrant stories and acknowledge them. So then I became involved, Catherine, with the current immigrant and asylum seeker challenge in New York City. I started about 15 months ago joining the individuals, several of them faith-based in their orientation, but who were literally at the Port Authority bus terminal in New York every day, starting at 5 a.m., welcoming people who were, most of whom originally were being sent by Governor Abbott of Texas to New York, many of whom, a significant number of whom, were Venezuelans fleeing political oppression. And I would note, as I do often in trying to educate Americans and New Yorkers to this story, the people who are coming to America from Venezuela are by and large walking through 6 countries. They're using the very limited resources they have, often to pay, whatever word you like, people taking advantage of them to move them from one place to another. They demonstrate unbelievable resilience and determination. And then they get to the border, where things could not be more messed up, possibly. Mexico has not worked out a way to welcome and keep people there. The United States buses people. The governor of Texas buses people all over. Yesterday, the governor of Texas signed a law that says that he can arrest immigrants, which is presumably unconstitutional. But meanwhile, he signed the law, so we assume that he will start arresting people. I myself will be going to the border in about a month in El Paso to try to see firsthand what's going on. But then what I have to emphasize is in New York, there is an outpouring of care and concern and support and resources for new immigrants. All you hear on the news, or mostly you hear on the news, the people who are demonstrating because they don't want a new shelter in their neighborhood. or the mayor complaining that the federal government and the state government are not helping enough, which is true, but complaining doesn't really help. But on the grassroots level, we have every kind of organization, from Orthodox Jews preparing food to houses of worship. 200 houses of worship in New York City have offered to become permanent shelters for up to 15 people. And so far, the city has managed to approve only 2 of the 200. So we have an obstacle with our own government, but we have an amazing determination on the part of a lot of people to help, in the process of which, as I indicated when I started, I made some serious connections to my own immigrant history and discovered a radio address given on behalf of the American Jewish community by my grandfather, saying that it was our obligation to welcome immigrants. In that case, he was talking about people escaping from the Holocaust, but he was on NBC radio in 1939, talking about the obligation to help immigrants and refugees. And then I thought I would end this intro with just a little interfaith story, and I'm glad Cynthia is on. But the Church of Latter-day Saints sort of, I don't mean they weren't there before, but they came forward in a visible way about 2 months ago in New York, trying to find out everyone who was helping immigrants, and in a wonderful way, just not trying to duplicate services by saying, like, what can we do to help? And they gave groups money for textbooks, and they gave groups money. Anyway, they found, this is my story, they found a mosque which exists in the West Bronx, which we've been working with for some time, which is informally a shelter. That is, it is not approved by the city, but it has, I think, probably about 20 men sleeping on the floor there. And the Church of Latter-day Saints asked the mosque what they could do to help. And the mosque said, well, they didn't have food for these gentlemen. So at least over the Thanksgiving weekend, the Church of Latter-day Saints said, we have a huge amount of food, which we're going to make available to you. And then the mosque said, but we have no way to cook the food. And the Interfaith Center of New York, on which I'm on the board, asked the Buddhists in the Bronx to cook the food. And that is exactly what happened. The Mormons gave the food to the Buddhists cooked the food, and it was delivered to the mosque. So I don't think we can do better than that.
That's
And I'll stop
wonderful.
there.
That's wonderful, Ruth. And I think both you and Mansour, and to some extent everyone, has emphasized the goodwill, the spirit that really does lie underneath it all. Time is marching on, so I think we're only going to have time for one more round, and then I encourage people who are listening, as well as the panelists, to raise questions. I think we already have a very rich agenda, but let me sort of put a quick question to each person and ask you to try to at least frame an answer, so that as we go forward, we can think about it. So Beth, you've emphasized the enormous importance of the religious responses in all their complexity, etc. My question to you is this appreciated in the policy worlds where you're operating? Or if not, is there something specific that stands in the way, or that is an opportunity to try to bring this faith dimension, which you describe as so central, more into the discussions and the action?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. You know, I felt for many years that kind of the international community, the UN agencies, the big NGOs, et cetera, didn't quite know how to deal with faith-based communities. Sometimes they would mention them, but they got a little nervous, a little uncomfortable talking about faith, values, spirituality, and tended, I think, to see faith-based groups as well-meaning, trying to do the right thing, but not really having much to contribute to the global policy debates. That all changed in about 2012 when the UN High Commissioner for Refugees organized a huge meeting on faith-based communities and began really to engage with faith-based actors and to see them as reliable, consistent, important partners. And since then, you've seen much more effort on the part of UN agencies in particular to work out, to learn from faith-based communities, to work with them, to appreciate the many contributions they make, not just in welcoming refugees or migrants to their communities, but in contributing to some of the policy debates. Finally, I have to say, I just loved Ruth's example. I think that's the best possible thing that comes out of some of this interfaith ministry, and want to stress that working together on very concrete things like providing food to migrants sleeping in a mosque also strengthens relationships between those traditions. It's by working together that people of different faith communities come to know and appreciate each other, and that in itself can be a transformative experience.
Well, I think that does respond to Mansour's challenge of having more knowledge and more research, but also somehow being able to combine the sort of enormous size of the challenge with the stories, which make them human. Cynthia, you also highlighted and have posed a lot of very challenging questions. Let's look a little bit at a darker side, which is the polarization that we're seeing around migration and refugee issues. And obviously, it's a polarization that's not between the virtuous religious and the cold-blooded non-religious, but very much within each community in very complex ways. And you also have highlighted the legal. Maybe you can give us some pointers in how we might think and work towards analysis of those issues.
Well, thanks for the easy question. Yeah, this is really the crux of what we've got to work with. I loved Ruth's story, and I think that's the beginning of, and surprisingly is still in its infant stages, but I think that's the beginning of what can come from this, that more interfaith cooperation will help with getting to know people on different ends of the spectrum, and will help with bringing people together more. One of the things that I think I've always seen is, if you're working together to serve somebody who may have less than you or may be needier than you, it brings something out in people that makes you recognize, makes you grateful, and gratitude is very powerful, and it binds you together in a way. And doing more of this, I think, can heal some of those divisions. Now, unfortunately, some of the political divisions are fomented not necessarily while they exist within congregations. They're fomented by politicians for political reasons. And it's something that we really have to work on addressing. And I think it has to start by a lot of well-meaning people in our congregations, and probably by doing some of the things that will bring us together with other people that we may not have as much in common with, but working side by side to help people will bring out great things in us. Now, I think that there's also legal issues that are being thrown in as impediments for helping in some of the faith-based situations. And examples, I think, that a few people have given about in the United States, about states creating individual rules that may impede, a pastor from picking up people and driving them to church, that may criminalize helping migrants. Those are legal impediments that churches have to work on. And I also think that it's an opportunity for a temple and a mosque and a synagogue and a Christian congregation to come together and work on some of those things together, not necessarily in a political way, but to further their religious beliefs of helping their neighbor and reaching out to strangers. I think those things have to come from the faith-based beliefs, and not be overly politicized. Don't draw on the political. I think that will destroy some of the good work that can be done. And I'd love to hear from other people on that. But I think there have to be also some generators of this, some catalysts, some people in the community that can bring that energy and bring those people together. I think we can see this in a number of communities coming together to combat that.
So bringing out some of the better angels in all of us, all our communities. Mansoor, Bangladesh is facing an election coming up, some difficulties, and the issue of the Rohingya, even though it's a very small number within the huge population of Bangladesh, it still is an issue. How do you see the wonderful welcome that you witnessed when you were there in Cox's Bazar in 2017? How is that taking shape, and how does that relate to this fundamental issue of the local politics around the refugee issue? And you can also comment on the International Court of Justice case if you wish, but I'm really quite taken by the complexity of dealing with the politics of the Rohingya issue in Bangladesh.
Okay, so I was muted. Sorry about that. I mean, you're absolutely right. We've got elections coming up, and on the 7th of January, we have the general elections. But I have to say that fortunately, it hasn't been picked up by the major political parties, and it's not become a kind of a political football, the refugee issue. Thank God. We were worried that it may become an issue, but it hasn't become an issue. But I think the point that I was going to make was that, you know, one of the things that we are doing in Cox's Bazar is actually doing quite a lot of capacity building work and research and advocacy with both the host community and the refugees and the refugee community. And one of the things that we've found from a very early stage is that the level of trust is very, very low within the refugee community. And I think, you know, this is probably true everywhere. You know, the trust level with refugees is very low. And I think the major challenge that we all have to face is how to actually address that particular trust deficit issue. I mean, one of the things I think I would say what we have seen in Cox's Bazar working with refugees is that if the religious actors, leaders, imams, and others get involved in the kind of the everyday communication work that happens in the camps, you know, that can actually address that particular issue of trust deficit. And given the fact that, you know, a lot of NGOs and international agencies have this kind of thinking that, you know, a secular program doesn't really need religious leaders, religious people. I think there is that kind of a challenge, I think, that we are facing. And I suppose, given the fact that we have in Bangladesh a strong NGO tradition, what has happened is that the big NGOs, small NGOs, have actually involved a lot of the imams and religious leaders in the programming, and they've trained, as I said earlier on, a lot of these imams and others who are involved with the community to actually communicate some of the messages that needs to be given to the youth and the women and others. And I think that has been quite a successful kind of program that has evolved over the last 6 years in the refugee camp. So I think the network that we are working with is a lot of young people coming together and developing an informal trust network. And I suspect this informal trust network has to be built also within the greater community at large, involving the religious communities and community leaders. So I think this is very, very important. And given the fact that there's a low literacy rate among the refugees, this becomes a critical factor that if you cannot communicate the right messages, and if we cannot get the right interlocutors involved, then it will create many more challenges. So I think the issue of trust is a major factor, and the faith-based organizations and leaders can play a very important role. And in terms of the legal process that you talked about, there is a case in front of the International Criminal Court and also in front of the International Court of Justice to address the issue of justice and accountability. But as we know from our experience of other cases, these cases take a long time to unfold, and people have to wait for many years for the verdict to come out. But the verdict may not actually help them in addressing the issue of repatriation or going back to Myanmar. I mean, as we know, that the courts can give a judgment, but that judgment probably will not be enforced because the enforcement power is not there. But all said and done, I think the important thing as we look forward is how to create a condition in the camps and how to develop a relationship between the host community and the refugee community, which will create a better environment for these refugees who are now stuck in a very small, crowded area of Cox's Bazar. I think without addressing this issue, if we do not address this issue, then we may create a lot of problems in the future. I mean, the problems are already there in terms of youth unemployment, in terms of trafficking. A lot of girls and women are being trafficked from Bangladesh to other countries like Myanmar, Indonesia. So these issues will become a major challenge, not just for Bangladesh, but for the neighboring countries. So I think, repatriation is a policy that has been advocated by the government of Bangladesh, and rightly so. And I have to say that the refugees themselves want to go back to their own country, which is Myanmar. But for the time being, we don't really see that happening. So in the meanwhile, I think there has to be a very much an integrated approach in terms of creating a condition within the country itself where these young people can be educated, can have employment, and can actually stand on their own feet. Because we know that the international resources are not there for these refugees to be maintained by international organizations. So they have to find self-sustaining ways of actually keeping themselves alive. And as you know, as you probably have read, the food rationing has been cut progressively by the World Food Program over the last year or so. So there are a lot of challenges that we are facing, and one of the ways these challenges can be addressed is by creating a more holistic approach in terms of addressing some of these issues. And this is where I feel the religious leaders and actors and faith-based organizations can come in and create a bridge between the host community and the refugee community and address this trust deficit issue. So there's a lot to learn from what we have seen over the last 6 years in Bangladesh in relation to the Rohingya community, but there are also probably lessons that we can learn from other examples across the world.
Catherine, would it be okay if I just made a comment? I really appreciate Mansour's outlining. There's the local reaction and what's happening there and how that can be filled by local faith-based actors. But I think one of the things we've discovered, and I know we've talked about in prep, is that these migration issues are more complex than they've ever been before. We have an incredibly complex landscape. And I no longer think even one country can solve those problems, let alone one faith. These are things that require a complex understanding and a complex response. And it will involve, the UN, the OAS, other multilateral organizations, and faith-based organizations together. And having an environment, I think UNHCR has kicked that off. I think Beth talked about that a little bit. We've seen just this year meetings that UNHCR has had with faith-based organizations trying to coordinate. I think there has to be more of a bringing faith-based organizations into these multilateral discussions. And I appreciate Mansur kind of outlining all the different levels of responses that are needed.
And I think the challenge, Cynthia, that we are facing is that there are certain stereotype thinking that we have, which basically negates the role of faith-based organizations and faith actors. I think that's the first challenge that we probably have to overcome in many countries. Even in a country like Bangladesh, which is quite strongly driven by faith, the thinking is that it has to be secular in nature. The faith-based organization actors really don't have much of a role to play. I think if it is a challenge here, I can see how big a challenge it can be in some other parts of the world. So I think demystification of the role of the faith-based organization and faith leaders is something that is probably very critical and very important that we should all be thinking about.
And that goes back to the point that Elizabeth made about the UN. It's taking the UN forever to recognize, that faith-based organizations play a role around the world. I think people are nervous, Mansour, they're nervous about faith and they're nervous about proselytizing. But most of the groups that we're talking about are out there doing the best versions of grassroots level relief and aid and development. And we need the sort of world powers to do a better job of recognizing that. And by the way, that's exactly the problem that we have right now in New York City. I have a mayor who talks endlessly about the importance, I think, in my judgment, a little too much, about the importance of faith to him personally and about how he loves faith-based organizations. But his administration is moving so slowly to recognize the work that's being done on the ground by people of every faith that I talked about, that is just absurd. And so you need these examples, you need these little stories. But we also need, and I don't know what role Berkeley Center can play in this, Catherine, but we need sort of a manifesto to political leaders, both globally and nationally, to say this is a resource, nothing else. We're not asking you to love this religion or that religion. We're not asking you to adopt a religion yourself. We're just saying this is a resource of people in organized communities who listen to their faith leaders. Not everybody listens all the time, but who listen to their faith leaders and are inclined to do good in the world for people other than themselves across lines of difference. And it would just be great if the powers that be, Elizabeth was optimistic about the UN. I'm trying to get her optimism, but if more of the powers of be in the world absorb this perspective. I'll tell one more story and then I'll take up my time and you don't get to ask me a question. But during the Ebola crisis, when I was at American Jewish World Service, we found out fairly quickly, what I think you all know, which was how contagious the virus is, that the virus is contagious even after the death of a person who dies from it, and that therefore the particular Muslim, death rites, funeral rites that were taking place were actually contributing to spreading Ebola. And it was really clear that the US government had no influence on correcting this, and that the Marines that the US government sent to try to help, and I'm not saying they did nothing, but the people in Liberia saw them as like people in moon suits, hazmat suits, whom they didn't know and who they had no reason to listen to. And so we contacted Lema Bowie, a well-known peace activist with whom we had worked over some time. And she said, basically, only the imams can convince people to alter their burial rites, and to basically the simple remedy was use lots of bleach. And so American Jewish World Service made a grant to the National Imam Council of Liberia. And that was the way in which the news about public health was spread effectively. And that's the kind of thing that leaders need to understand better than they do now.
So Ruth, you have the best stories. I think we need to capture some of them. Let's hear from Cyril. We have quite a lot of questions coming in, which I encourage you all to read and to look at. But let's first just turn to Cyril and see a little bit, taking off from some of the challenges that the other panelists have presented. How do you see that playing out in Ukraine and beyond?
Yes, thank you for these questions. I should say that Ukraine demonstrates a remarkable solidarity within the society, between the religious communities, except probably the Orthodox churches, two Orthodox churches that still quarrel with one another. I think we are facing an imminent, a coming crisis or difficulty, challenge, if you want, which has to do with with how the things develop in the front line and how the external European and American help comes or doesn't come. You all know about the stalemate in the Congress regarding the aid to Ukraine, and we all observe how much less media pay attention to the developments in Ukraine. Nothing changes here. I mean, we have the same situation where still hundreds of lives are lost every day, and people are under airstrikes and rockets, but certainly the perception is changing, and I think it is something that affects the attitude of the Ukrainians. The emigration, the waves of people leaving the country and coming back depends on how the Ukrainians see their perspectives in Ukraine. Well, there was first a mass exodus, as you know, in the beginning, in the first days of the invasion, when like 1/3 of the Ukrainian population have left the country or their places. They became internally displaced people. Then in April, May 2022, there was an influx of those who decided to return, even though the war was still going on. Well, of course, some areas in Ukraine were secured and were liberated from the Russian occupation. But even if you take Kyiv, it was still under the strikes, bombardments, and people nevertheless came back, returned, because they had hope that eventually, you know, the counter-offense would succeed. That they were in good mood for their perspective. Then there was a short period of time in the winter time when there were blackouts because the Russians tried to destroy the infrastructure, electricity and heating facilities. And then some people left the country who had returned to Ukraine. They left the country for this short period of time with blackouts in the winter time, and then with the coming of spring, they would come back to Ukraine. So this immigration comes and goes. It develops in waves. And now, as you know, people see how the world, you know, is turning away, and also the aid is impeded somehow in the US and from Europe, with the countries like Hungary blocking the European aid, for example. Their hopes decrease, and this pushes them to consider going to Europe or to other countries again, leaving the country again. So I think this attitude and the perception, how Ukraine is perceived in the world, and how the Ukrainians perceive the perception of Ukraine by the world, it plays its role. They play together their role in the behavior of the Ukrainians regarding leaving the country or staying in the country. So essentially, well, my point, what I want to emphasize is both perceptions, the way how the world perceives Ukraine nowadays under the circumstances, how the Ukrainians perceive the world's perception, which they perceive as being diminished, it influences the decisions of the people whether to go or to stay, and this may increase really the wave or cause a new wave of immigration, of refugees. That's something I think that probably needs to be taken into consideration by the policymakers as well, and by the way how we still talk about this war. So that's what I wanted to bring to your attention.
Well, I think you've underlined very forcefully something that all of you have emphasized, but particularly Cynthia, the enormous complexity of these issues and the ways that different aspects are intertwined and tangled, so that it makes it difficult to go back to the imagined idea of refugees who come, conflict is solved and they go back home. Something that we haven't highlighted here, but that is, I think, very vividly illustrated in all of these cases is the fact that refugee situations tend to be so protracted that they last for years. I mean, that's with the Rohingya crisis that we've witnessed unfolding, that's a very clear example that it seemed inconceivable in 2017 that we'd be where we are in 2023, almost 2024. We do have a lot of questions. I'm going to encourage the panelists to take a look at them and see which ones they want to jump into. The first one, I think, speaks exactly to this because it is looking at people who are driven away from their homes by the complexity of factors that include now climate change. Ruth was highlighting that in her early comments, but I think we're seeing that in the Ukraine situation, obviously, in so many different parts of the world. Whether or not anyone will ever reach a definition of climate refugees, I think is improbable. I see shaking heads. But of the other issues, I think perhaps the most prominent theme that I take out of a quick read, and we will take a harder look at this, is looking for examples that address this very core issue of the reluctance and unease of so many people in the policy world, in all its complexities, to think coherently, strategically, based on information, as Mansour has emphasized, about the complex roles that religious institutions play. So looking for some examples. I don't know, Beth, do you have any quick inspirational examples to offer on that, or any of the other questions that you'd like to pick up?
Sure. Thinking about what's happening at the global level, I think faith communities made a definite difference in policies on internally displaced people, on refugee uprooted children, on women's issues. They were really in the front line of bringing concerns of local community to big UN forums and leading to major changes in policy, which I think is really good. It's hard to judge sometimes the outcomes of on advocacy because there are usually a lot of groups working, say, on immigration reform in the US, and it's hard to say, well, the faith communities did this and secular organizations did that. But, certainly have been a part of a lot of these coalitions that have worked to address the causes of refugee flows, as well as the policies that affect their entry and well-being. So I think there are lots of positive examples. They're often overshadowed by the terrible things that are going on anyway. And it's hard to say what would have happened without the faith communities, would things have been even worse.
Maybe
go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, on a local level, I know as I've interviewed a lot of faith-based organizations in the US and in the Americas, the formation of, let's call them welcome centers. I know our church has things called welcome centers. Other faith-based organizations have similar things, and they're not just in the US, but they've influenced local politics and local people to be able to welcome those refugees or migrants or people who have ended up at their doorstep. Many of whom may want to go back home if things improve, but the reality is that they're there for now, and they may be there for a long time. And the sort of things that they've recognized, they need to understand the community that they're in. They need to understand the legal rules. I was in a refugee camp in Brazil a few months ago, where a number of religions had come together to build the location where they were. One of the groups, a couple of religious groups, were coming in to give legal advice, so pro bono legal advice. These sort of things have been influential on local communities to be able to then drive people to come and befriend and help and create community for those people. And I've heard stories of people saying, my daughter now plays with somebody who's a refugee from Venezuela, and they've learned so much about each other. I think that there's so much influence happening at a local level that isn't as visible on a big, global scale, but these things are happening all over. And I think they're starting to have impact on local communities. There's a number of stories like that I wanted to mention.
Yeah, I think that this question of information / stories is very important. Though I know from sort of dealing with people that if a story is totally positive, people do tend to turn off a bit. So that I think that there has to be some critical spirit in the way that these experiences are presented, which is easier said than done because each of the stories is complex and you're trying to highlight it. Ruth, you're sitting in a fascinating position where you're both dealing with the city of New York and some of the issues. You're dealing obviously with the global issues and the fallout from geopolitics, shall we call it, but also you're right next to the UN. And I know you've been trying to think through where the UN comes into all of this. How do you see progress in trying to sort of think through how do we encourage a more coherent, forthright culture of encounter or engagement with these religious worlds as we try to address these enormously complex issues?
Not a question I wanted, because I think it's very hard. I mean, I think that, UN itself is a pretty complicated entity, and they're used to, I think one of the challenges here is that they're used to dealing with big leaders, right? The UN deals with the universe of ambassadors from the, whatever it is, 200 countries in the world, or the heads of those countries. And with the exception, the laudable exception of the Pope, none of the other religious entities have sort of a global leader. And that shouldn't say none, some do, but the Pope is highly visible. But most of what we're talking about is, what the Muslims in the Bronx are doing, and what the Episcopal Church is doing in New York, demanding attention to the interfaith shelter system. And what the Church of Latter-day Saints is doing, as I said, just literally showing up in November and contacting everyone who was working with immigrants and saying, how can we help? And those are really impressive, but that doesn't exist quite so easily on the global scale. So you need, I'm not saying this will happen, Catherine, but you need some initiative from secular leaders, which is, I think, several of us were talking about. I need a mayor to be serious when he says, I want to work with the faith community. We need, the people dealing with the Rohingya crisis to say there's this huge outpouring of love and care. How do we build on that? We need people noticing the efforts that Cyril is caught up in. I'm not saying they're not noticed, but I'm saying that for a whole variety of reasons, secular leaders, political leaders, and the UN have to include in that, are like, we don't know what these faith-based groups are there out there, but they're little groups that do something, and maybe they're spreading religion, which we don't like, but meanwhile, they're probably providing some aid, which we do like, but they don't see the networks. They don't see the power. They don't, when you ask, like, what could happen? Well, the UN could convene a major interfaith assembly and ask literally every religion in the world, depending on how people count. I don't know, there's 10 or 15 or 20, and just not say you're single pope, but could you send a small delegation? Even my fractious Jewish community could actually, fight among themselves and then agree who are the 6 people who should go represent the Jewish community at the UN. It would happen, and there would be some engaged discussion. But as I say, we have this perfect microcosm in New York. We have faith-based groups just literally coming out of the wazoo to do anything. And we have a theoretical premise that we could save the city a lot of money if they would approve various houses of worship as shelters. The estimate yesterday was $543 million a year. And yet the city puts up every obstacle to doing this because somehow, I don't know, faith makes them nervous. Small grassroots groups certainly make them nervous. That's, my life story. Anyway, so yeah, I'd love to see more national, I mean, you're talking about a global effort to recognize the power of the faith communities. I'd like to see literally some more national leaders and even local leaders fully embracing that. Maybe I'm missing the examples, but I know my problems in New York, but I can't say to you that I know immediately, I hope it exists, but some cities in the United States where mayors have said, like, we want to work with every mosque, church, temple in this community because we know how helpful you could be in addressing our homeless problem or our food insecurity problem. The groups are addressing it, but I just don't see the local leaders fully embracing it. It happens on some more district level, right? I have council members in New York working closely with all of these various houses of worship, but not sufficiently at the city level.
Well, those are a bit sobering, but also inspirational. So as usual, Ruth, you always have extraordinary insights. We're coming very close to the end. Does anyone want to jump in with one last sort of guide to us as we look at the culture of encounter?
Catherine, if I may.
Yes.
I mean, we've talked about the international, Ruth has talked about the UN role, but if I could bring it down to a very local level, I mean, in terms of the issues that we are facing, I've already said that education literacy is a major challenge, particularly with girls and women in a community like the Rohingya refugees in Cox's Bazar. It's a huge challenge. And this is, again, an area where religious leaders can come in and work with the community at the community level to encourage girls to come out of their houses and from their camps and take part in the educational programs that are being introduced in some of the camps in Cox's Bazar. So this is very important for the long-term sustainability of the community, that education should reach all the different population, all the different communities and categories of people. So this is where I think certainly us at Center for Peace and Justice, we have established a refugee studies unit just outside the biggest refugee camp in Kutupalong. And one of the things we're doing is to encourage young people to come and sort of learn certain courses that we have introduced. And one of the challenges is that we don't get enough girls and women to come to such programs. And this is where, again, interreligious, intercommunity activities can be very important, and religious leaders can play a catalytic role to improve the situation.
Yeah, well, that's, I think, an excellent challenge as we come to the close of this session, dealing with the longer term issues. And the more that the forced migration issues are not short term, somebody leaving and coming back, but people being for decades living in these limbo forced migration systems, it leads us to focus on children, on gender relations, on violence against women, on all of the host of issues that are everywhere, but that are probably accentuated within the disruption of these situations. There are questions which we will look at and which we'll take into account. As I said at the beginning, this is a framing discussion for what will be with members of the panelists are members of the group that is working specifically on the culture of encounter, forced migration dimension. So we will be looking at the questions, at the many wonderful ideas that I think all of you put forward today, that are both examples, positive examples, but also challenges that we're facing as we think both about the religious dimensions of the forced migration issue, but also at the links to this effort to look both globally and locally at the culture of encounter and how different kinds of communication and engagement, we're talking about both, can open new ideas and lead us hopefully towards better solutions. So as we said, this event has been recorded, and so the video of it will be posted online. We are looking to continuing discussion, welcome inputs into it. We will have at least one more webinar, and we'll have a conference. We plan a conference at Georgetown University. So emphasizing the two elements, first of all, that this is a continuing look at these religious dimensions of the refugee challenge, but also that this is part of this broader Berkeley Center effort, which is very much a collaborative, which is both very academic, very intellectual, but also trying to bring in the extremely pragmatic, practical experience, which I think is something that came out so strongly in this webinar, both the common elements of the forced migration system, but also how individual each situation is and how the issues of forced migration link to so many others, the interconnectedness that I think is one of the theme words of the year 2023. So I think we can end by wishing all of you the best possible end to this difficult year, 2023. And we all look forward very much to continuing our work together. So thank you all so much, to all who have listened and to all of you who have given us, I think, such honest but also insightful wisdom on a difficult topic. So thank you.